Hi guys and welcome back. Today is going to be part 1 of this piece and I will be finishing up the painting next week, so stay tuned for that. But today we're going to be doing the line work and the color comps. So I'm excited about this because it allows me to show more of the color comp process. This is something that I do for every single one of my paintings to more or less this degree, depending on how complicated it is or how the color comps are working. I'll do more if I'm really struggling or I want to explore more options. And sometimes I'll do less if I just know what it's going to be and I put it down and it works. But I pretty much always cut those out of my videos because they take a long time and then you end up seeing the colors anyways. So today we're actually going to be able to experience that. I'm going to talk about it and talk about the things that I think about when I'm doing these color comp sheets so that I can try to get the most out of them. But we can talk a little bit about the concept for this one. So I was extremely lucky to be able to live in the totality zone for the solar eclipse, which means that I was able to see the full solar eclipse happening. It was honestly one of the most amazing experiences I've had in my life. I will treasure that moment for the rest of my life. And when you look at these photographs, they just do not represent what it was like to see the actual solar eclipse. So you see these pictures where like people take them, and I took one and it looks like this, where it's just the black moon and then behind it is this halo of just bright blown out light. But in reality, it's these really defined bands of the corona and it looks gorgeous. You can see them shifting and it takes up such a huge part of the sky. It's not this tiny thing that's far away. It feels tangible. It feels like this thing that you're experiencing and connecting with. And the way that it affects the sky is amazing. As like they say, it's this 360-degree sunset. So it feels suddenly like it's this three-dimensional space that I'm suddenly being part of, rather than this flat thing that's so far away. It's something that I can experience. And it was just amazing. It was so beautiful. And because this is something that the photographs just do not represent, and I know that I'm going to have these memories fade with time and those experiences and that emotion that I had, it's going to fade. I wanted to create artwork that could represent that could make me remember that feeling that I had when I experienced it. And I've thought about how I wanted to represent that a few different ways, and I knew that I wanted at least one painting, because I think I'm probably going to do several, but I wanted at least one of them to represent the actual experience, a person experiencing something that is awe-inspiring, that is that incredible. So this one actually didn't start off being a solar eclipse painting. It wasn't going to be that one for me, but I was working on this portrait, and as I was working on her face, it started feeling a little bit more awe-inspired. Can I say that too many times? And working on her pupils, I started putting in that corona from the solar eclipse, and I really liked that. And I liked that it was like the solar eclipse is behind us, the viewer, and we're looking into the face of someone experiencing it. So I was really excited about that because it was kind of this interesting way of depicting something that I hadn't thought of, but suddenly it clicked and it fit a few of the things that I knew that I wanted to show in my painting. So I was really actually excited about this. I know that I will definitely be doing another one that has a little bit more of the actual eclipse in it and more integration of different elements. But this one I was really excited about, that it started feeling like it could be something that could show the actual experience of a human person seeing it and having those emotions. And I will be the first to say I absolutely could have pushed the expression more. That's one of the things that I tend to fall back on, is I tend to be a lot more stoic with my expressions. So this one could have absolutely been turned up a little bit. So it's a thing that it's a work in progress, but overall I liked the gesture that I had in her eyes. But also when I was working on this, you might have noticed in the sketch, I gave her this solar eclipse tattoo on her hand. And it wasn't until I was actually inking it that it hit me. I drew this thing very flatly. It's almost like I drew it how it would be just on a flat piece of paper, but we're looking at her hand basically at the side of it. So the back of her hand was very foreshortened, so it was not working at all with the way that her hand was actually turned. So I just made sure that I erased that out from my light pencil sketch so that I could reevaluate that. I'll probably just fix it up and make sure that it is correctly foreshortened before I dive into anything. Print it back out and then copy it back into the sketch and line work it that way. But I'm glad I didn't like jump into it without thinking, because then it could have really flattened out that area. That actually is a huge thing that really flattens out things, and it can take away quite a bit from paintings, is when things aren't properly foreshortened or the perspective isn't where it needs to be. And I am definitely not perfect with that, but I am trying to be more aware of things like that, things that really push the dimension of the painting and things that can really take away from it. Okay, so we can talk a little bit about the color comp. So I did just show you what I do when I take a picture of the line work and how I edit it a little bit to make it clear and crisp, and then I print it out on my watercolor paper. And if you have access to a printer that can print on watercolor paper, or really almost any paper, I've found that this has allowed me to spend way more time on my color comps. When I had to draw them out by hand, I tend to be very lazy with them. But because it's much easier to be able to just print off a sheet and have an exact representation of where each things are, I spend a lot more time on it. I make sure that if something isn't quite right, I spend more time refining it. And it really has actually benefited the final quality of my pieces. But I have already finished the first one, and this one actually went pretty smoothly for me when I was working on the color comps. Most of the time, I really, really fight with them, and I have a struggle of getting it to work the way that I want it to. But I find that it's particularly helpful when I have at least like one or two things in the painting that I have a clear idea of what I want it to be, like the the cornerstone of the colors. Like for this one, I knew that I wanted the sky to be this twilight blue that I saw that filled the sky, and that was going to be a large part of the background. And I wanted her facing the solar eclipse, so that was a really important thing, to have that look behind her. And I do variations on that blue for each of these color comps, but having that as the structure behind these really did help me think through how I wanted to create it. As I was painting it, I began making more decisions as I went, and that's why as I go, they start getting a little bit similar, because there are things that I decide, yes, I wanted them to be that way. Like I decided that I do want her to have dark hair. I end up doing one at the very end where she has lighter hair, but I much prefer the dark hair with this mid-tone blue behind her. I was trying to make sure that the values were working at least in some way so that she would stand out. So in the end, I think that my favorite way to have the values themselves laid out is I like having her dark hair with a light shawl and then this mid-tone for the background. That allows her to have the most contrast and for her to pop out from the background. And as I was working on these, there were a couple that I felt like I'd really just messed it up right at the beginning, particularly in the skin. And I do think that it's because it just got really muddy. I was throwing a lot of colors down really fast, so they did start getting that muddy quality that you can get with watercolors. So at first I was like, I don't know about these. I should probably just cross them out. But I decided to go ahead and finish them off and see what I can make out of them. And I was actually surprised because some of those that I felt like were too far gone were some of my favorites. So it does go to show that sometimes it's definitely worth pushing it. Now, if I did do one of those color comps for my final one, I would take the overall colors and the placement, but obviously I'd be able to get much more clarity in the paints rather than having it get really muddy like it is with pretty much all of my color comps. Honestly, most of my color comps end up having that kind of quality to them where they're really rushed and chunky and thick paint, but it does really help figuring out where the colors are going to be. But yeah, it actually really was a surprise which ones I liked, which ones I was like, wow, I didn't see that happening. Overall, they are, I'll say this again, they are very similar, and in general, it's much better to try out several different things so that you can know which ones absolutely you like and which ones are not working. And that is something that I could absolutely get better at. I tend to get something in my head and then I really like it and I push with it. Usually the ones that I really try a variety of things are the ones that I'm really struggling with. So I guess in some ways it's okay, and in some ways I could always get better at that. But for this one, I did have this feeling that I wanted for this piece, and I felt like this was capturing it, I guess. But ultimately, I would love to hear your guys' opinions on which color comps you like the most, which ones you don't really like, if there's ones that you think I could mix the background with the figure or whatever. I'm just interested in what you guys are thinking. I'm going to number these at the end so you can see which ones and reference them. But yeah, I think that some of these I really like certain elements from each one, and I usually end up doing that with my color comps. I'll do a bunch of them, and then I can kind of cherry pick which parts of each thing that I like. So one thing that I do really like, and I'd like to try to emulate in the actual painting, is I believe it's the first painting that I did where her hand, there's a shadow on the back of it, but the shadow gradiates from this really pure blue into this purple. And I loved that look of the shadow being like this two-tone color, and it was a total accident in the color comp, but I do know that I want to have that in the piece. And I do want this really strong shadow on the back of her hand. I like that gives it form. And there's a few other areas that I like, that I think I want to continue. Specifically, there's a couple backgrounds that I really like the purity in the color that I was able to achieve, whereas some of them got a little too out of hand of adding too many different colors. So I think I want the background to be pretty straightforward as far as the color that I have represented in it. I'm actually really excited about having more time between finishing these color comps and painting the final one, because it gives me a chance to look at it and think through which things I think could be explored more and figured out better. So yeah, I'm really excited about that. Anyways, I do post every Wednesdays and Saturdays. I think I mentioned that. And in the description, I have a link to all the tools and paints and everything that I use. I also have a link to my Instagram, my art shop, as well as my P.O. box if you're interested in that. And yeah, that is it for today. So I will see you guys next week. Thanks for watching.